Thank you for joining me for this episode of God Talk. And on this episode of God Talk, we are on part 2 of our 2-part series, The Great Lie. Now, last week I talked to you about The Great Lie Part 1, and we're talking about just deep fakes and how people use artificial intelligence to improve upon lies. You know, for thousands of years, people lie all the time. But like when I was a kid and someone lied, you'd always say, prove it. Well, you know, if you couldn't prove it, then you didn't believe someone's lie. The problem, and we talked about this last week, is with deep fakes, artificial intelligence and so forth, you can make things look like they really happened. And we talked about the danger of that. And the danger is ultimately, you just can turn neighbor against neighbor and, turn a state against a state, a country against a country, and a world against a world. And before you know it, because of lies and mistruths, we like it's the end of the world as we know it. And we talked about how Satan is the father of all lies and how Satan uses that then to destroy God's creation. Now, in part 2, I want to talk about something that is kind of connected, but also slightly different. And what I want to talk to you about is the simulation theory. And most of you have probably heard it in one form or another, but simulation theory is the fact that people don't believe the world is real. Like somehow, like everything that we're experiencing is really a program that a computer is like pre-programmed, and we're just kind of living it out, thinking it's really happening, but it's not. It's like a virtual reality. Like when I was younger, I can't remember if it was when I was in high school or college or when, but there were video games that kind of would do that. One was called SimCity, and then I think there's like one for farms and farm animals. But with SimCity, it's like you were the mayor of a town, and you put roads in, and then you had to put homes in, and then you had to put hospitals in, you had to put fire departments in, you had to put airports in, and the people would be happy with you, and when they're happy with you, like tax revenue would grow and the city would grow, and when they're unhappy, it wouldn't. That wasn't exactly the same thing because like these things weren't programmed, but in essence they were, because there was a master puppeteer pulling the strings of the puppet, making it, however it turned out, it was being determined by someone other than the people that thought they're just like living in the town. It's a similar thing with the simulation theory. Also, you might remember probably around the same time, I don't remember exactly when the movie was, but The Matrix. And The Matrix was about the fact that people thought they were living in reality, but they weren't actually living in reality. They were human beings that were kind of, their brain stems were plugged into this computer network. And so I can't even remember the whole premise. Like the aliens were using, I don't know if their bodies for like energy or nutrition. I don't remember what, but there was like an alien type race that was utilizing the actual human body, but they just needed the humans to think that they're actually doing life, but they were not doing life. They were just imagining that they're doing life. Well, so this is becoming a popular thing in today's world and also in the church. And I want to talk about why specifically it's a problem in the church, this belief that like life isn't real. So there's two kinds of simulation theory, and one is like nothing's real. Like you're not real. Your car you drive isn't real. The food you eat isn't real. Nothing is real. Like it is all, you're just a computer program playing itself out. And the other version of simulation theory is that you are real and I'm real. So the people are real, but everything else is make-believe. Everything else is virtual and nothing else is real. And you'll watch these TV shows where it looks like elk is running on the top of water or certain things are glitching, like an animal will freeze for like an hour and just not move. And they're like, this is proof that like there's an error in the code of the simulation theory. Like you're real, but the car that you drive, the food that you eat, nothing else is real other than you. So those are the two different like options to this concept of simulation theory. Well, why am I talking about it? Because it is really the great lie of Satan part 2. And this is becoming like more and more popular, I think, amongst church people. I say that only because like I'm knowing more and more like pastors youth leaders, musicians, like people that work full-time in the church that should know better, who are actually like believing that this stuff is going on. And I'm here to tell you, like, you cannot be a Christian and hold this view. It is worse than, equally as worse, if not worse, I'd say probably worse than the theory of evolution. Because the theory of evolution is basically a denial that there's not a God, and that the way that we got reality and have what we have today was not by God creating it, but was, ultimately by this process that took place. In the case of theory of evolution, it's a real process. Like physicality is real, but it's a denial of God. Well, some people will be like, well, when it comes to the simulation theory or that like this is all computer generated, people will be like, well, there's a God behind it. Like, no, God is the ultimate computer programmer, so this doesn't have to be unchristian. Well, no, it does have to be unchristian. You have to know theology. You have to know the Bible. You need to be able to think more than 2 centimeters deep to be able to understand that, like, this violates your faith. But let's talk about some theological problems with simulation theory, that life is just this simulation that we're experiencing. Well, first and foremost, Genesis can't be trusted. And I'm here to tell you, like, all of Scripture at its foundation is based upon Genesis. And if you can't trust the Bible in the very first book of the Bible, in the very first chapter of the Bible, in the very first verse of the Bible, how are you going to trust the Bible later in Genesis? How are you going to trust it in like Proverbs or Psalms or Isaiah? How are you going to trust like the story of Jesus? Like, if the very beginning of it is bad, like if your first bite into an apple is rotten, I mean, what makes you think the rest of it is going to all of a sudden be perfect and fine? I mean, it's not. A rotten apple's a rotten apple, and if Genesis is wrong, none of it can be trusted. And if it can't be trusted, guess what? God's a liar, because God told you this is how it happened. Like, you may have sat there and like told your kids about the tooth fairy and a bunch of different things like that, like, and claim to be maybe like leprechauns are real or what have you. I got to be careful what I'm saying, because what I'm saying, like, some of you might be listening to this with your kids in the car, but like sometimes as parents, like, we lie. I never told my kids those lies about some of those mythical people we celebrate on certain special times of the year. Once again, I'm being real vague here, guys. I never told my kids that. Why? Because when I found out those things weren't real, how can I trust my parents? Like, they're a liar. And so God's a liar if, like, he just made this stuff up in Genesis. Like, was he just like wanting to tell a good story? Either God can be trusted, Genesis can be trusted, or God's a liar. If God's a liar, we've got a lot of problems. If God's a liar, he's not good. If not, God's not good, then like he's evil. And like, we have problems. Honestly, like, if this is true, God becomes the author of evil and of sin itself. Because the Bible tells us that Adam and Eve are the ones that, well, first of all, Satan is like the one who rebelled against God, and he's the father of lies and the father of evil. But then Adam and Eve are the ones who, on their own accord, chose to fall away from God. It's not like God had predestined that for them to make that decision. They weren't forced to make that decision. It wasn't a computer simulation. And so if it was, then God is the one who creates evil. And we know from Scripture that's not true. That's heretical to say God's evil and creates evil. God is not the programmer of sin. He didn't program Adam and Eve to disobey him. Then when we get into Jesus, like, if everything is just simulated, if this is all a computer program, then Jesus coming into this world and ultimately suffering and dying he's not real. He's just a program of God. He's a mirage. He's a joke. He's a fake. It's a divine drama. It's like watching a good television program. It's not real. Are you seeing some of the theological problems? If if you actually believe this crap, if you believe this, like, it destroys the concept that we've been made in God's image because we're not real. And even if like we're real and everything else is what's not real, we're still not being made in God's image because we don't have free will. Like God makes us in his image, and part of how God makes us in his image is like we're not a program. We're independent. We can think like logically, we can think rationally, we can think in terms of order and what's good and what's right. God gives us a free will. There is no free will. There is no free will if you're a computer program. I mean, we're up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, we're 6 or 7 already deep, significant theological points that make us Christian. If by believing them, and if we don't, you're not. And if this is just assimilation, then how do we? And God is the master programmer. Then how do we not know if there's an office filled of other master programmers and other gods that are assimilating other galaxies or other universes elsewhere? So maybe God is not the one and only true God. Maybe there's a million of them. Because if he's just like the computer programmer of our reality, how many other realities are there, and how many other computer programmers / gods are there doing that? It also emphasizes like the physical, and it ignores things that like the program is all about physicalness, like a table, a fork, a car, like a road, like a tree, like the simulation is all physical. It ignores the realm of the soul. How like the Bible tells us we have souls. How do you simulate a soul? How do you simulate the spiritual? Like God's spirit, angels are spirits, demons are spirits. It ignores all of that because it just focuses on what we can observe with our senses. And ultimately, because it focuses on the physical, ultimately it denies heaven. Like the simulations, this reality, what about the spiritual reality of heaven? Where's that in the simulation? What happens to the simulation when the physical dies? Is there like a simulation part 2? Like you take it up a level? I mean, seriously, like if you're going to believe some of this crap, like how is that different than like believing in reincarnation and other things that are just like, they're not true. They're not Christian. They're false religions. And I would go as far as to say this is a false religion. Like, honestly, I think by believing this stuff, I don't want to, the Bible doesn't address it, and I don't want to overspeak here, but I think it's quite possible, like believing this excludes you from heaven. It's a false religion. It's like denying Jesus. It's like denying God. It's like denying the Holy Spirit. It's like being, a Hindu. Like, it's not Christian. God's a liar. God's responsible for evil. There's just some unforgivable stuff in this whole list that I read that, like, you can't be a good Christian and believe this. You just absolutely cannot. Yet, this great lie part 2 is coming into the church. Like like the fringe used to believe it in the world, and it's not new. Like, once again, we had a concept of it, and I talked about like the Matrix, SimCity. I even remember like in the 1970s, an episode of the original Star Trek series. It was kind of explaining what happened to the captain that was before Captain Kirk. It was Captain Pike. He had gotten in this accident. His body was mangled. These aliens found him, and they were able to make him feel like imagine that he still could run, and that he was still good looking and young, and they provided for him this imaginary virtual reality, almost like wife, and they were able to just live out their days in this false reality. Like, this isn't a new thought. It's just, it used to be science fiction, mind you. There's like no proof for this. There's no scientific proof for any of this. It's like hippies 60 something, like acid doing, pot smoking, like it's just ridiculous. And People in the church are believing some of this fringe crap now. Why? Because we don't know reality anymore. Why? Because we live behind like a virtual reality. We live behind computer screens. We live behind phones. We live behind tablets. Like all of the stuff that is just a bunch of data, and it can be manufactured to be whatever we want it to be. And it's like picking up a good book. Like 100 years ago, you pick up a good book and you can get lost in it. Now you just get lost in like the images of video and of social media and of virtual reality and the things that you can create. You just get on ChatGPT and like you tell it what you want to see, and it makes it for you. And people don't have a clue of what reality is. And like, as I said last week, Satan is the father of lies. His lies have destroyed what reality is. This is the second part of it. This lie is causing us to deny God. For Christians to think that they're still Christians, but somehow like enlightened Christians that are becoming non-Christian because they're believing things that aren't even remotely Christian. And Satan's causing them to think that there's no problem with it. Why? Because he's the expert liar. If you don't know what reality is, if you think that like this is a simulated reality, then first of all, put your stinking phone down. Get out from behind your desk and your computer. Go step in a fire ant mound, for goodness sakes. Pretty soon you're going to know what reality is when those bad boys start biting the heck out of your foot and working their way up your leg. Why don't you go roll around and frolic in a little bit of poison ivy or something like that? Because you know what? You're going to come face to face with reality pretty quick. Like, run full speed into a tree. Like in a simulation, if this was a simulation and we're a part of it, like I get like we could maybe see things and think that that's real. But you don't smell in a simulation. You don't have those other senses and you don't feel pain. So when someone claims to you that like life might be a simulation, here's what I need you to do. You just got to pop them a real hard one in the nose. Because have you ever been hit in the nose so hard that like, man, it just makes your eyes tear up? I mean, I have. I've played goalie, for soccer for 45 years. And sometimes that ball gets kicked so quick up close that it'll pop you in the nose before you even know what happens. And man, those eyes will mist up on you. If you want to know reality, and if this reality is real, get popped in the nose really hard. Sit in a fire ant mound. Experience pain, and soon you'll realize really what is real and what is not. And what you're sitting behind at your desk right now, what you're listening to this podcast on, this stuff isn't real. What's real is the stuff that we experience in nature. But the further we get away from God's creation, the further we will realize, the farther we are from realizing what is real and what is not. This is a huge problem. I talked about how last week it was a huge problem for this world and potentially the destruction of this world. What I need you to hear and understand today is it's a huge problem for the church and for faith and for ultimately the potential destruction of faith itself. Thank you for joining me for this episode of God Talk, and I look forward to talking to you next time. God bless.